Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really fascinating guest, Sheila Copps, who is former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Cabinet Minister, just an incredible politician, and somebody who I think thinks very, very deeply about where we are in Canadian politics and political history right now, joining us tonight. Sheila, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Brian.
My pleasure, my honor, actually. So tell me, I've seen you on TV a bunch in the last little while. Where do you think we are? It's a pretty challenging situation. Do you think Trump is going to level these tariffs that he's threatening? And if so, what should Canada do?
I think he's going to level incremental tariffs. I don't think it's going to be 25%. I think there's been some talk from the United States that he's going to start at 5% and go forward. So perhaps the disasterizing on our side of the border isn't totally warranted, but you can't ignore the fact that this is going to have a big hit on the Canadian economy, and also the fact that Trump is not the type of person who responds to traditional campaigns. He is a bully. He's surrounded by bullies, and therefore he needs a bully back process, which is why I think the decision by Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau and all ministers except Alberta to basically fight fire with fire is a good one. You have
You've
to hit
dealt
back hard.
you've dealt with numerous different politicians over your career. Have you ever dealt with anyone that is like Trump before?
No, no. In fact, it's interesting because I think, Brian, a lot of it has to do with the times being very different today. Because if you look at the Canadian government and the Canadian opposition, when we were in government, even though we fought on issues, generally speaking, we had good relationships amongst the political parties. I don't think that's the case today. In particular, when you see how the Conservatives are so personal and every attack is a personalized attack, that's a different approach. And Trump loves that approach, sort of personalizing. He's going to put his opponent in jail. He's going to attack his best friend country, Canada, and annex us. He's going to annex Greenland. I mean, he is operating under a different set of rules than I think the 20th century, the last century, people talked issues, but we generally tried to work things out. And there was a modicum of interest in accommodating. Well, in this case, Trump certainly doesn't intend to accommodate anybody.
But it seems to work, that strategy, that
Well, it
style.
hasn't worked yet because he hasn't been in government yet. So let's wait and see how
But
well it works.
did it work during his first term?
I don't think he was as aggressive during his first term. Because if you look at the group of people that he had around him in his first term, he had a lot of political people, some old war horses in the Republican Party. Most of those have either fled or been beheaded. So right now he's dealing with total newbies. I mean, if you look at the gentleman who took over the Pentagon, it's a joke. It's a joke. And unfortunately, what he doesn't realize, and I don't think what Americans realize, is that their political presence in the world is greatly diminished, and it's not because of economic strength or the role of China or Russia. It's because people are absolutely shocked that the majority of Americans would vote for Donald Trump. I mean, it's just beyond the pale. And so I think their status in the world and their reputation has suffered a hit as a result. Now, has taken office this week. We'll see what happens, but I think in the first go around, he actually has professionals advising him, mostly professionals, and this time around, he has mostly millionaire bozos. So
And some
we'll see
billionaire
what the
bozos
outcome will
too.
be. Well, millionaire, and I say millionaire because I'm being conservative, but yes, some millionaire, some mostly billionaire, I guess.
So I got to ask you then. In Biden's final address, he said that there's a uh, a billionaire oligarchy that's taking over politics. Do you fear that? Do you agree with that?
I don't think that's true in Canada. And one of the reasons, when Jimmy Carter was alive, he gave a speech one time about political funding mechanisms. And when the US Supreme Court decided at some point several years ago that third party advertising could continue unfettered and that PACs could invest millions and millions in every political candidate, they basically gave up the right to a real democracy, because that opened the door to an oligarchy. If you are bought and paid for by millions of dollars before you ever get to office, it's impossible to think that you can act in a democratic fashion, because the first item that you have to consider in any decision is, what do my owners want? And by owners, I mean the people that paid to get you there. And that's true for the Democrats as well as the Republicans. It's really destroyed democracy in the United States as we know it. And the oligarchy piece is even more frightening, because with the kind of the di- distress and kind of disarray of traditional medias, it means that when you buy Twitter, or let's say somebody's going to buy uh, the social media vehicle, that TikTok.
TikTok.
If some American buys TikTok, or if Kevin O'Leary buys TikTok, he wants to buy TikTok, then you'll not only have them running the White House, they'll also be running all the social media outlets, which probably provide more news, information, and social media influence than any traditional media. You know, it used to be that the Globe would carry a lot of weight in elections, and now I think it's bifurcated and trifurcated and quadrificated to like a million little news pods like ours.
So you think this style of politics, very partisan, very hateful, insulting, has come to Canada as well. Why
It
has it come to
it
Canada as
has
well?
it has come. I think the difference is that because of the very strict financing laws in Canada, it's still very difficult for a particular perspective pack to be financing political parties in toto. I think it's come to Canada. First of all, we're very influenced by the United States and by an airport, so you can hear it. We're very close to the United States as neighbors. We're also very close by language. We're very close by media connections in many ways, and I think that has a big influence on us as well. The Trump takedown is going to affect our country, because, as you can see, Alberta is split off from the rest of Canada. It tends to be more pro-Trump, and ironically, or perhaps not ironically, it's amongst young Tory voters and supporters. Um, the presence of Trump is supported by almost, well, over 40% of young Tories, which is absolutely shocking. But obviously, it is what it is, and so that's what the Liberal Party is going to have to deal with in the next election.
So it seems to work. This hateful, this very ultra partisan, this insulting, this calling your opponent's names. Frankly, the use of the F word with the way you
Yeah.
describe. I've seen so many bumper stickers and signs,
Yeah.
F Trudeau, all over the place. It's amazing.
Well, I think it does work, and we used to say that Canadians don't like negative advertising. Well, that's not true, because it works. You can go back 3 elections. With Trudeau, it did not work. But if you went to Stéphane Dion, and also with Michael Ignatieff, he's not here for you. And then Stéphane had another slogan. The Tories do manage quick. And now they're trying to actually um, characterize your former partner in provincial ads. Ford's already put ads on TV, sort of saying Bonnie's too expensive. So I think those negative ads do have an impact, because what happens is, in particular, if you have a leader who's not that well defined, it allows them to be the first definers. And then that's what sticks in people's minds when they're going to the ballot box. So it has a huge influence. First of all, negative advertising, that's limited by Canadian laws that don't let you spend that much. But the other thing is just the velocity of social media spin and hatred. And everybody seems to be, if one insult comes, another one gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, you wouldn't believe the stuff that I've seen written about me. Anyway, I don't really care, because I'm not running for anything, and I have no intention of getting an appointment or two. I'm not looking for anything. But, people call you a craven old crow, and, with a slithered CU, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's just awful, you know.
It
And
is. It's terrible. But we got into this conversation because we were talking about Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta's positioning vis-a-vis the balance of the premiers, and some of the, at least the social media, I haven't seen the advertising, but the social media posts that she's come out with against the balance of the premiers and the federal government's position. And there was, some depiction that that what the federal government and Justin Trudeau are trying to do right now will be as negative to the Alberta economy as what Pierre Trudeau and the National Energy Program was. And the comparisons I don't think are fair, but that's what she's doing. It's almost as if she's taking all those things that you've described as very negative from a Donald Trump strategy standpoint and part of the Pierre Poilievre strategy, and are using it in Alberta versus Canada. Is that the case?
Oh, that's very fair. And I think you're right. If they did have a vote, most Canadians don't want to join the United States, but I'm sure you'd have a fairly significant percentage of the oil patch crowd that would want to, just because first of all, right now, if you look at tariffs as they are, obviously, if oil and gas were not allowed to be exported to the United States, it would be a huge hit to Alberta's economy. So there's a financial negative right there, which is going to help Danielle Smith make her point in Alberta. However, they are in a country, and in that country, if we don't hit back by stopping to either export stuff or applying our own tariffs on popular American items, what's our alternative? To just lie down and kiss the ring or turn around? That's about it. I mean, the fact that she went to his inauguration, or is going to his inauguration, has gone to his inauguration, is outrageous. The man's talking about annexing our country, and you're going down there to celebrate his victory. It's really pathetic. Very
So
pathetic.
on tariffs, fight back, tit for tat.
You have to. Very hard. And I do think that if you look at the energy profile of Canada, the US needs our energy to make their factories work. And that's why I think the reports last week came out saying that Trump is going to go in incrementally. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. So perhaps when he gets when he gets into detail on what's going to happen, it may not be as horrible as we think it's going to be. There's certainly going to be an impact.
But even if
But
it's
I
a
think
small impact, tit for tat is your strategy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You can't give in to a bully. You have to basically bully back.
We're going to take a break for some messages. We're chatting tonight with the Honorable Sheila Copps, former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, very involved in politics in Ontario and in Canada for quite a long period of time. We're going to turn from Trump and tariffs to the Liberal Party and what's happening there after we take a break. Back in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is the Honorable Sheila Copps, former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, very involved in politics for quite a long period of time. I've got to ask you about the role of Deputy Prime Minister and what happened just before Christmas with the resignation of Chrystia Freeland. You've been in that role. How difficult is it to disagree with your boss? And how do you disagree with your boss?
Well, in Christia's case, I think it was more her role as finance minister that, the decision to for the prime minister to fire her basically probably left her no choice. And given that was the catalyst for Trudeau to leave, that's given her some brownie points in the party, because there were a lot of people who, the majority, certainly in the caucus and in the country, thought even though Trudeau's done a fantastic job in politics, you have a shelf life, and his shelf life was past his best before date. So she opened the door to the leadership. That probably hurt her in the short term, but interestingly, when you look at some of the people who are supporting her, they were extremely upset at the time, and they've kind of gotten over it, because now you turn the page, you move on, it's a new leadership, and so it starts afresh. So I think she was right to do what she did, but I also think that she probably should have done it if she didn't like his economic policies, and that's the reason that she gives in the letter, or gave in the letter. She probably should have left when the economic policies were announced, not when she was fired. So there's a bit of mixed messages there, but for sure, the Prime Minister's office should have expected that she would have had that reaction, and the fact that they seem to be completely caught flat-footed just shows how insulated the office had become and why the Prime Minister really did need to leave.
Do you think she made the right decision?
Yes, I do. I think she had no choice because obviously, if you're the finance minister and the deputy prime minister and you're offered a job to negotiate with the United States but with no department, it's pretty much a demotion. And since she did know that she was planning to run for the leadership, a decision to leave could be seen as kind of a jumping off point for a leadership bid because she's no longer in cabinet and she can start working the ridings in a pretty systematic fashion.
The letter that she posted was reasonably personal and fairly critical. Was that appropriate?
I think it didn't ring totally true because she was basically saying she left because of the economic policies, but she didn't leave when the economic policies were announced. She left when she was fired. So it, it's a bit like, and I did write a column about it. Do you remember when Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien were fighting over who fired who? When Paul was ready to leave and Jean found out, and then Jean fired Paul before Paul was had a truck pulled up to the back of finance and was shredding documents, and then went on TV and said, well, I had no idea this was going to happen. It was just pretty disingenuous. And I think hers was the same because in reality, if she really felt that strongly about the economic policies, she should have stepped down at the time that they were announced. In particular, and I did agree with her. I thought the decision to put out the $250 rebate or the GST Christmas thing were pretty tacky and not targeting the constituency that really needs help. So it sort of didn't succeed in turning Mr. Trudeau's fate around.
So tell me a little bit about your experience with parties that are out of favor, and have they got a chance of coming back? The Liberal Party is obviously way down in at
Yeah.
least it has been in public opinion polls. They're embarked on a leadership process right now. Hopeful that that will change things. We've got some experience in the past. Kim Campbell, Brian Mulroney. Pierre Trudeau, John Turner. What's your experience? Can you turn things around with a change of leadership?
You can turn things around. I mean, Kathleen Wynne in Ontario did turn things around. I think the interesting thing is in the last number of leaderships, if you go back to Trudeau, for example, Mr. Trudeau, Justin, when he was elected first, we were in third place, and he ended up vaulting us to first place. It was a phenomenal campaign in 2015, and he literally got he got as many young people on board as had never joined the party through the marijuana policies and some other things. So that was good. It is a tough battle. I think now one of the things that I'm observing, and I decided early on to support a young woman who I think has shown great leadership in government, and she's in it for the long haul. That's Karina Gould. I think Liberals tend to want to look for a savior, and I think a lot of people are lining up now behind the leadership of Mark Carney because they see him as he can come there and take the whole thing. This might be a two-step process, and that's why I'm banking on somebody who's actually in it for the long haul. So I think Liberals should just do the hard work of rebuilding ridings, raising money, convincing people, and it is a long and arduous process. I mean, when I first ran, I ran in a riding that hadn't been Liberal for 50 years, and trust me, to win that and then make it a solid Liberal riding is damn hard work. There is no magic bullet to, oh, you pick this leader and all of a sudden that leader is going to be vaulting us to victory. It doesn't work that way. And I think the party's leadership race now is a chance for people to focus on who we need for the rebuilding process, not necessarily who we need as the savior.
Now,
So
some people have compared her candidacy to you, and I think it was 1981 when you were running for a leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. Tell me, many people don't know her. Could you tell me a little bit about her?
well, it's funny because I had, my brother who loves politics as well was sending me a note saying, well, don't get too far out there because, it looks like it's going to be a fight between Freeland and Carney. And I said, well, first of all, I don't want anything from anybody. I'm old enough that I can say and do what I want in life without expecting anything in return. And I said to him, in my lifetime, I would like to see a woman prime minister who's elected to the job in my lifetime. And I'm 72 now, so I've got maybe luckily, if luckily, 2 more decades for that to happen. But Karina is 37 years old. She's multilingual. She's dynamic. She speaks to ordinary people. She understands the pain of trying to juggle parenthood with politics. She was the first person to have 2 children while in cabinet. I had one, and that was 37 years ago. It's hard to believe it's taken 37 years to have a child in cabinet, or 30 years thereabouts. But the other thing about Karina that people don't know yet is she's personable, but she also has a vision. And I know that the decision of Mr. Carney to when he launched was kind of saying, well, the Liberal fiscal policies are too liberal. I happen to be one Liberal who thinks that if you look back on Trudeau's time in office with childcare that actually Karina negotiated, with pharmacare, with dental care, we are actually reaching out to the people who really need it. And I think that's investments. That's not fiscal irresponsibility. So I'm not amongst those who go to Davos and talk about how we're going to turn the world around by putting more money into the pockets of billionaires. I'm for those people that just want to work the communities, and I think Karina is certainly that's her forte. She's incredibly well spoken. She can attract young people. She's got a great team of young people supporting her, even though she just jumped into the race when Mr. Trudeau decided to retire. She didn't plan a campaign for 2 years like Mr. Carney's been talking for years. We've heard his name. He's going to run. He's going to run. He's going to run. And Christian was organizing for quite a while. Karina's just started and she's got a 2 month window, so it's very tight, but she's going to go out there and do her thing. And I think she's going to surprise a lot of people. And I'm very excited to be a part of her campaign.
Well, that's a great description of her. My comparison to the Sheila Copps of 1981, running for the Liberal leadership in Ontario, is that an
I think
apt?
it's valid. It's valid because if you listen to both Kearney and Freeland, they're both talking about how the Liberal Party has moved too far to the left, and Mr. Trudeau's taken the party too far to the left. Well, I don't agree with that at all. I think what Mr. Trudeau did on reconciliation is incredible. And I served in a government for 10 years, and we had Indigenous every Thursday night. I sat with 13 chiefs and spent hours poring over change, but we didn't put the money where it needed to be spent. And when you're talking about 150 years of colonization and underspending on education, it takes money to turn that around. So I think it's disingenuous to suggest that Mr. Trudeau's record is somehow too conspicuously left. I thought he had wonderful initiatives that will endure, and I think that his successor should have that same vision. I don't want another leader of Davos running my country. We've already got a billionaire in the United States who thinks, you know, everything will trickle down to those you know, who wait. But I think you need a leader who will actually go out and invest in childcare in every kid. You need a leader who has a vision about lifting up the poorest in the country. That's what's going to lift our boat, our collective boat. And I think Karina will represent that. And this debate in the next 2 months is going to be somewhat focused on where's the Liberal Party going and where do we want it to go.
Some people think that the business liberal, the blue liberal, the more Bay Street or Main Street oriented Liberal was not welcome within the Liberal Party in the last couple of years, and numerous different people that represented that part of the Liberal Party left. One of the things that Liberal parties in the past have done is they've been able to keep different people involved in leadership. Jean Chrétien, who beat you, welcomed you in as deputy prime minister. Tell me about.
I think the difference. My take on it is not so much the blue Liberals. I think the Trudeau team was generally dismissive of anybody over 50. So maybe I feel it in ageism that their advice was not wanted. And I think that cut out a whole swath of pretty solid wisdom in the Liberal Party. And in the column that I wrote where I spoke about why I supported Karina, I referenced one opportunity that Chrystia Freeland had to reach out, and she didn't. Not only did she not reach out, she was pretty solid in basically telling Jean Chrétien to buzz off because she was going to fix China, and that ended up in a 2-year debacle. Without getting into all the details, if you remember when the business community was quite upset over what was happening over China, a whole bunch of people, including Brian Mulroney, reached out to Chrétien and said, look, you've got some good connections over there. Can you go over and help smooth this over before it turns into a 2-year debacle? And he was offering to do so, and Chrystia Freeland came out publicly and just said, look, if we need you, we'll call you. It was so I remember her standing on a step right now, and when she said it, I just thought, my goodness, would any true Liberal really treat their former leader like that? And what I will tell you with Karina Gold, and it does make a difference, the first time she got into office, she called me up and said, look, can we have a cup of coffee? I need some advice. When she had her first child, she said, how did you manage? She reached out to elders in the party and wanted their advice. And I think there's a whole lot of people who will come back to the party with that. So I kind of agree with you that the current crop cut people out, but I thought it was more the old elder people because they sort of felt that we didn't know social media, we didn't know the new rules, we don't really live in the real world, and political strategies our political strategies aren't as useful. And I think that's changed with Karina.
My sense was that David Peterson was able to work with rivals, that Pierre Trudeau was able to deal with and work with rivals, John Turner being the best example, but others as well, and business-oriented people, Mitchell Sharp, John Turner, etc. That Jean Chrétien was with Paul Martin and yourself as an examples. Have leaders since then been willing to work with rivals, or is it too much in just the PMO and their advisors and a small insular group?
I think it depends on, I think the longer you're there, the more isolated you become. And Brian Mulroney's former chief of staff gave me some good advice when I came in. He said, get out of Ottawa as much as you can, get out of Ottawa, because when you're in Ottawa, it does become a smaller and smaller circle. And I think somebody recently characterized it as an impenetrable fortress. For sure, the leader's office has that possibility. I think, and having worked mostly with Chrétien, I can tell you that Chrétien himself had a good feel for where the people were. And that's what I like about Karina Gould. He was, even though obviously he went to Montreal, his daughter married a Desmarais, he wasn't exactly hurting, but he still had the flavor for what was going on in Shawinigan. And Karina's like that with ordinary people. She doesn't travel in the Davos circles. And I keep saying that because sometimes you think, and I think there's a certain amount of truth to the fact that conservatives, even though they all went to Davos before, they kind of hate it because they see it as a place for the world's global elites, and they're outside of that rubric. I think both Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney are part of that Davos thinking, and that's why I like Karina's positioning and also her thinking, because she's really a very Main Street person, and doesn't get caught up in. She also doesn't exclude people. I think the Liberal Party is a big tent, and for it to be successful, we have to bring in the blue Liberals as well. And that doesn't mean throwing out everything that Trudeau has done, but that does mean getting rid of some pretty dumb ideas like giving everybody a GST break at Christmas. I don't know who came up with that one, but honestly, when I woke up that morning and read it, and I was talking to a friend who's liberal, I said, that is disgusting. Like, I was just fed up with it, and it just seemed so grasping, almost to the point where whoever introduced it should have realized at the time how dumb it would look. So
Bag
that's
of hammers,
done.
I think was what someone's quote was. We're going to take a break.
Well, that was Stephen, but he's also gone crazy too. Stephen LeDrew, remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We're going to we're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with the Honorable Sheila Copps. We're going to take a little bit of a step back just to remind everyone about her long and incredibly significant role in politics. And then I'm going to ask her about how we can actually think about the Canadian political spectrum and competition in the upcoming election. It's probably going to happen sometime this spring. Stay with us, everyone. Interesting conversation tonight with the Honorable Sheila Copps. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. The Honorable Sheila Copps, former Deputy Prime Minister, is my guest tonight. And we're talking about the Liberal leadership. We're talking about Trump and tariffs. We're talking about the Canadian political situation with an upcoming leadership process in the Liberal Party, as well as a probable election sometime this spring or at the latest October of this year. Sheila, I wonder if you could just take a step back for everyone and remind everyone of your history. Your father, I think, was mayor of Hamilton, and I think there's a hockey arena named after him. And you've got quite a long history in politics. Is that correct?
Well, the hockey arena is no longer named after him. Now it's First Ontario Place. He was woke, I guess. I'm just joking. They actually had a sponsorship uh, financial arrangement, so it's not named after him. But I did grow up in a political family. My father loved politics. He was a sports broadcaster actually. By origin, which is what brought him to Hamilton. He was a sports broadcaster for CHML, and then eventually got into politics, but it just fit him like a glove. And when we were little kids, we used to run around going to the bingo halls and distributing his flyers and stuff like that. And I always loved it. I have two sisters, and one of them hated it. My brother and other sister love it or like it, but not necessarily as participants. But yeah, I grew up in it, and I think actually the former finance minister in Ontario, the Conservative, said the worst day in politics is better than the best day on Bay Street. And I think that's true because I felt when I was in politics that I never really worked a day in my life. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd have so many different projects that I was working on. It's a way to help people. And I think what the average person doesn't understand is about half of the job, especially of an MP or an MPP, is actually helping people in the constituency. So, and this, if you have the time, I'll give you one silly, crazy example. Where
Please.
there was a young woman in my riding. She had epilepsy. She was in pretty rough shape. She was on disability, FBA. She came in the office, and she was getting treatments for electrolysis because the type of drug that she was on caused her face to sprout facial hair, and it made her very socially uncomfortable. So we were trying to figure out how can we get her electrolysis covered because she was on disability. She didn't have money for electrolysis. So I contacted this doctor Rosenthal, who was a dermatologist at McMaster, and he said, "Look, if you get the person who does the facial removal in my office once a week, I'll fund it through OHIP." So we got this woman facial hair electrolysis funded through OHIP through this very unique little setup that we had. And my constituent got her facial hair removed. Anyway, fast forward 15 years later, I'm in federal politics at this point, and the program to fund electrolysis had grown to $20 million. So I was kind of looking at it. You could see how one good idea can sometimes get out of proportion, because when people discovered that you could actually get electrolysis through your dermatologist supervision, it became a huge cost to the government. But I only mention that is because we were able to actually take this one poor woman and get her help, and she got her facial hair removed and was able to go out in the world and not be like the bearded lady, which is extremely important if you're doing that type of work. It's so rewarding because you kind of feel like you've helped change somebody's life, which is fantastic.
You ran for politics in 1977?
I did. I ran and lost by 14 votes, and then I ran again in 81 in the same riding and won handily. And from then on, I went federal in 84, and in 84, 88, 93, 90, don't, anyway, up until 2004, I stuck around. So I was in federal politics for 21 years. But when I lost in 1977, I actually went to work for Stuart Smith, who was then the leader of the Liberal Party in Ontario, and I ran his Constitut office. So it gave me 4 years of real experience. So when I got to Queen's Park, even though I was a newbie, I'd actually dealt with the kinds of files that I just mentioned to you on an ongoing basis for 4 years, which is a real baptism by fire, as it were.
You were famously a member of the Rat Pack at one point in time during, I guess, John Turner's leadership, the
Yes.
official opposition. And, you know, I think about some of the comments about Pierre Poilievre and how he was the attack dog for Stephen Harper. Is being a attack dog or part of the Rat Pack a good experience or not?
Oh, I think if you look on it historically, you have to remember that when the Liberals were defeated in 84, I was the only Liberal elected between Toronto and Windsor, 7 million people. I was the only Liberal. And there was a lot of talk about how the Liberal Party was going to disappear and it would be like most other countries, we'd have the NDP and the Tories. So the arrival of the Rat Pack, which included most people actually had some media background. I had come from newspapers. Brian Tobin was a TV reporter. John Nunziata was a lawyer, but kind of feisty, and then Don Boudria. And then we also had Jean Lapierre, who ended up with a big media career after. So we were fairly, and Jean-Claude Maliapar, we were media savvy people who were able to turn this small band of warriors, were able to basically upend the government and keep the NDP at bay. And I think from 84 to 88, it was actually the Rat Pack that kept the Liberal Party alive. But the difference from then to today is when we were there, I don't think there was never a time when we were personal. Um, if you remember when in those days we used to have this award, it was called the PAW Award. And we used to come out on Fridays with an envelope, and it was called the Patronage Award of the Week. And we would have nominees, and we would say the envelope, please. So there was a lot of theater involved. And in the PAW Award, we'd put, number one, her tomato juice was $15 or orange juice or whatever. Number two was some other egregious thing on the government side. So we turned it into theater, but people actually look forward to the PAW Award to see who was nominated that week and stuff. We made it a little bit of fun. It wasn't like nasty. I think today the tone in the place is just a lot more nasty. And I don't think that people can laugh at themselves or at each other as much as we did and could. So it was needed at the time. By the time 88 came around, I was hunkering for government because it does get a little bit boring to just always have questions, 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 and when I did form part of the government from 93 to 204, as minister, you can do things in a bigger way. So you can make, like, I banned all development in national parks, and that's to infinity. So that's something that you'll never turn around, because now we legislate the development in national parks so that governments would have to bring it in, and it's not going to happen. So stuff like that is pretty groundbreaking, and it makes you feel like you're making a difference in life.
So if you thought that the Liberal Party was going to win the next election versus if you thought the Liberal Party was going to lose and was going to be in opposition for 4 years and having to oppose a Pierre Poilievre majority government, Would the same person be the logical leader, or would it be a very different type of skill set that you would need in the leader?
Good question. If you had a crystal ball, you could answer that. Obviously, it's a different skill set, because the skill set that you need to be in opposition is sharp communication, a bit of capacity to, a bit of theater for sure, but also a capacity to kind of turn the shiv at the right moment. Government, you need the vision to carry out your, not just your fiscal, but also your social vision. And when we came in, one of the things that Chrétien did to say, look, I'm not beholden on one side, and I think this is good advice for whoever is the new leader. He said, I'm going to take half of the money and put it into social programs and half of the money for fiscal responsibility. So he kind of split it down the middle and left everybody a little bit happy, because there were some programs that you could bring in, but then you also were keeping tabs on the spending of the country. And ironically, it's not when we served on that committee, which they called Star Wars, we spent a year looking at every penny spent by government. I was on that committee. And there's a lot of areas where you can make reductions or eliminations. But what happens in governments is that departments tend to grow, 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 and there isn't always a review as to their relevance. So we had one particular, it was called the Ship Source Pollution Fund. And I was trying to lift the Irving whale because it had dropped into the Gulf of St. Lawrence with hundreds of tons of sea oil in it, and it was leaking. So we were trying to fund it, and there was $60 million in the Ship Source Pollution Fund. They had about 12 or 15 employees on some obscure little office on Saint Laurent, Ottawa. They had never paid out a single claim. And they've been operating for and charging money for ships coming into Canada for years. And when we tried to get a claim from them, they eventually they I think they eventually paid because I browbeat them so badly, but they refused to pay on the grounds that the ship, in when a ship sinks, it's then owned by the government, so we should just pay. So they didn't even want to pay, and they had this office with $60 million in their bank account to help uh, fight pollution in ships, and wouldn't do anything. There's one office that could probably be eliminated. Now, that's a small item, but nonetheless, I think we need to sometimes take a look at our spending side as well. And you'd be surprised at how mothers can be very good at spending, because you just spend what you have. You don't necessarily spend what you want to have in the future.
So you're obviously supporting Karina Gould because you think that she'd be the best person to lead the Liberal Party, what, in opposition or in government?
Well, I think it'd be fantastic if she formed the government this time around, but the numbers that are in the window right now don't look that positive. So I think realistically, we have to elect somebody who's willing to carry on the fight in opposition or in government. And I think she's the best person to do that. She's best positioned, partly because of her communication skills, partly because of her vision. She's not a Davos liberal, and I keep saying Davos liberal because I do think that if you look at the history of the both declared front runner candidates, which is Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, they both spent well, they both spent much political time outside of Canada, trying to have an influence on the global system, and I don't think they're as well connected to Main Street. That's my view. It's not to to diss them, but I think Karina's much more connected to Main Street. I mean, this is a woman who, in between high school and university, went to Mexico and volunteered in an orphanage for a year. Okay, she feels the people and speaks, I think, 4 languages at least fluently, and she's dynamic and she's young, and why not have the Liberal Party build on future renewal and not looking for a savior? That's my take on it.
Kim Campbell, when she was elected, when Brian Mulroney was and his government was looking like a major defeat, had a bounce in the polls, but it didn't survive. John Turner, when he took over from Pierre Trudeau, had similarly a bounce, but it didn't survive. And you indicated that Kathleen Wynne had a bounce when she took over from Dalton McGuinty, and it did survive. If you were advising a new Liberal leader in Prime Minister, actually, and they needed to go immediately into a federal election against Pierre Poilievre, what would your advice be? How do you have that hopeful bounce and then survive?
Well, what's ironic is I happen to think that I don't think there will be an election until the fall, because I think that what's going to happen is in March, with the Liberals getting a bounce, the NDP is going to have a bit of a dip, and they're not going to want to go into an election. So Mr. Singh can probably say, well, my lack of confidence was in Trudeau, and I'm willing to give the new government a shot. So we'll probably have an election in the fall. Ideally, if there were a spring election, that would actually assist the newly minted Liberal leader, because if the election is on the 9th of March, they go back into the House at the end of March, they go into an election in April, let's say, then the leader doesn't have time to make that many mistakes either, because you can make an awful lot of mistakes in 5 months, especially when people are looking at you with a pretty jaundiced eye because they are waiting for the mistakes to happen. There's a Kananaskis G7 meeting in June. I think Mr. Turner at the time, if you remember, the Queen was supposed to be coming, and he wanted to get out before the Queen was there because the French Canadians weren't crazy about the Queen and stuff like that. There were some political reasons why he went earlier. But I do think that going very early could be of benefit to the new leader. That being said, I do think that, Mr. Poilievre has not had a lot of pushback on his three-word slogan career. And I think in the course of the Liberal leadership debate, there's going to be a number of issues that are raised. You're going to get to see depth and breadth of candidates, and that's going to help the party, because we're not just a three-word slogan party. We do actually debate. Should we be moving to the right? Should we be staying in the course that Trudeau steered? I'd like to keep. I don't think I didn't agree with. I don't know. Carney obviously has to separate himself because he doesn't want to look like he's a clone of Trudeau. But I think a lot of the things that Trudeau did were very positive for the country, and they're going to end up in 20 years from now. People are going to say that the Trudeau decade was a seminal decade in the direction of Canada,
But a
and
lot
it's a
of the
direction
things
that.
that Biden did were probably positive in the United States. The Economist said the U.S. economy was the best economy in the world, and yet he went down to a major defeat, or at least Kamala
Yes.
Harris did.
No, but I'm not talking just about the economy. I'm talking about the seminal things like having universal child care, like having the modern day equivalent of Medicare, which they don't have in the United States, because they do put, and this is the thing that's interesting. I think a lot of people say that obviously immigration played a role in how Trump won. It's sadly so. But I think I had several friends who said, well, I'm interested in my 401k. That's all they're interested in. And their politics is very much driven by what's going to benefit me. Now, I know that's true in every country. Canada's no exception to that. But I think we're also educated, and because we have a country with two official languages, we've figured out how to build compromise into our political system. And I don't think there's a collective view in the United States. I think the Canadian view is not only what helps me today, but what lifts us all up. And I think in the United States is pretty well what helps me today. And that's different. So I don't think it's just the economy. I think it's much deeper than that. It's what kind of country you want to have. What do you do with your senior citizens? For example, during COVID, we were all appalled at what we saw in some of these private senior citizens' homes. And since then, really nothing's been done to address it. That's something that a future prime minister could tackle in concert with provincial premiers. And I think you get a lot of support from Canadians for something like that. But for that, you need to have a vision that goes beyond simply management of the economy.
So to summarize, tit for tat with Trump and his tariffs, you got to fight back hard. Don't think about electing a savior. Think about electing someone as leader of the Liberal Party that'll be there for the long term. Don't apologize for the more progressive policies of the Trudeau era. Don't be just focused on the economy. Think about some of those things like pharma care, health care, long-term care, et cetera, that have been the keys of the Liberal Party.
Childcare, I think especially too. Yeah.
And think about electing someone that's young and's got that youthful energy that can attract young people back to the Liberal Party.
Absolutely. I think that's probably where the direction of the campaign is going to go. Like you said, who do you want to savor, or do you want a future a future leader with vision? And I think we want a future leader that has the skills to communicate and a vision to keep the country going in a positive direction of helping, lifting everyone up, not just lifting ourselves up.
Sheila Copps, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your presence on our show, but also obviously your important role you play both today and lots of times in the public life of Canada. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you for having me.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online from Hamilton at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, on the social media and on podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thank you, Honorable Sheila Copps, and thank you, everyone else, for joining us. Good night.